the forgotten harbors of wealth. There was a time, long before the thunder of stock exchanges and the glitter of digital wealth, when the world's true centers of finance stood not on marble or glass, but on mud, salt, and risk. Before finance became an abstraction, it was a struggle. Before markets became mathematical, they were tides. In those days, the pulse of the global economy was measured not in numbers, but in the groan of timber hulls, the crack of sails, and the flicker of oil lamps in damp counting houses. This is where it began in forgotten port cities. Venice, Genoa, Bruges, Malacca, Aden, Lisbon. They were not empires, not yet, but doorways between worlds. Here, between the smell of spices and the sound of waves, humanity learned the first rules of money, trust, risk, and debt. And those centuries have washed over their shores. Their fingerprints remain in every transaction, every insurance policy, every global bank that claims to command the seas of modern finance. Because the story of global finance was born from the ocean. When trade invented trust, the harbor of Venice's 14th century, the smell of tar and olives, the clamor of voices in 10 languages, ships loaded with silk, gold, and salt. Every crate that left these docks was a wager. Every voyage a calculation, one that could end in fortune or famine. For the first time in human history, risk became measurable. A Venetian merchant sending a ship to Alexandria faced storms, pirates, disease, and treachery. He could not control fate, but he could price it. He could borrow, he could insure, he could hedge. And so, finance was born not in theory but in fear. The bill of exchange. It was a humble piece of paper, a promise written between men who would never meet. Yet it changed everything, because it turned faith into liquidity. It allowed wealth to move faster than ships. Here, trust became a currency and credit. The first invisible empire, the dockyards of speculation. In Bruges, speculation began not in offices, but in taverns. Rumors of storms or plagues could shift the value of entire fleets. Information became as valuable as gold. A whispered word from a sailor could spark panic or profit. This was the raw material of capitalism, uncertainty. Every ship on the horizon was a rolling stock certificate. Every voyage was a bet on the world's future. As these port cities grew rich, something strange happened. The merchants, once humble traders, began to resemble the kings they once feared. They learned a truth older than nations. Power does not come from land or soldiers. Power comes from credit. And with that realization, the age of empire was set in motion. When kingdoms learned to borrow by the 16th century, monarchs noticed something unsettling. The merchants of Genoa, Venice, and Antwerp were richer than many thrones. They commanded fleets, funded wars, and decided who would rule through their ledgers, and so kings began to borrow. Spain borrowed from Genoa to conquer the New World. England borrowed from Amsterdam to build its navy. France borrowed from anyone willing to listen. Finance had shifted from dockside chaos to statecraft. When a nation could no longer rely on plunder, it turned to credit. Debt became the new engine of empire, and behind every banner waving in the wind, there was a contract signed in ink, sealed with trust, and payable in generations of labor. The irony was sharp. The same merchants who once risked everything to survive the sea, now financed kings who risked everything to rule it. The rise and ruin of the first financial empires for centuries. These cities ruled not with armies but with balance sheets. Genoa was the banker of the Mediterranean. Venice, the broker between East and West. Lisbon, the collector of continents. But power built on trade is a fragile kind of power. As the oceans widened and new routes to Asia emerged, their monopoly dissolved. The Dutch took over the spice trade. The English mastered insurance. The French learned speculation. And one by one, the old ports began to fall silent. The very systems they created, credit, insurance, exchange, were exported to the nations that would eclipse them. They had written the rules of global finance, only to be crushed by those who played them better. Their downfall wasn't a tragedy of conquest, it was a tragedy of success. They had unleashed an idea too powerful to contain, that money could be made from risk itself. The ports beneath the towers, every skyscraper in a financial district stands upon invisible docks. Every trade made in New York or London is an echo of a merchant's gamble in Venice or Malacca. The DNA of those forgotten ports is alive in every algorithm. The derivatives that triggered modern crises are, in spirit, no different from the contracts signed in candlelight 5 centuries ago. The only change is the scale and the arrogance. We've replaced ships with servers, parchment with code, and storms with market volatility. But the essence remains the same: humanity trying to tame the uncertainty of the future by commodifying it. And perhaps that's the greatest irony of all. The world built on conquering risk now depends entirely on it. The ghosts beneath the waves, if you listen closely, amid the hum of container ships and the pulse of global trade, you can still hear it, the faint rhythm of history, the creak of wooden masts, the hiss of parchment sealing, the whisper of an agreement between strangers who could never have imagined the world they were creating. Every act of finance today, every loan, every investment, every line of credit is built upon that ancient trust. The forgotten port cities may be gone, but their spirit endures. They taught us that wealth could be imagined. that risk could be traded, that the future could be bought. They taught us to believe, not in gold, but in promises. And in doing so, they changed the course of civilization. The tide that never recedes. History moves like the tide. It retreats, but it never truly leaves. The ports are silent now. The waves roll over their foundations, but beneath every modern transaction their ghosts remain. Because the true birth of finance was never about money. It was about humanity's oldest desire to master the unknown, to shape the future, and to find meaning in uncertainty. And perhaps, in that struggle, lies both the brilliance and the blindness of our age. For what began in forgotten harbors has become the sea upon which the entire world now sails. When the ocean became a network, the ports that once defined the edges of the known world have vanished beneath layers of glass, data, and ambition. But their essence never truly died. It merely changed shape. Once, ships carried goods between continents. Now invisible signals carry capital between servers. The tides that once lifted wooden hulls now move through fiber optic cables, pulsing not with water but with electricity. It is a new kind of ocean, silent, borderless, and cruelly efficient. And like the seas before it, it is ruled by those who understand its currents. The digital docks in the age of Venice, trust was handwritten, sealed with wax, measured in signatures and blood. In the age of Tokyo, London, and New York, trust has been rewritten in code. The docks have become databases, the warehouses, data centers, and the merchants. The restless gamblers of the sea have been reborn as traders staring at glowing screens, their eyes fixed on numbers that change faster than thought. Each trade is a voyage, launched not from harbors but from algorithms. Each fluctuation, a storm. Each collapse, a shipwreck invisible to the human eye. It is the same story, only the instruments have changed. Risk still rules the water, only now, the ocean is digital. The return of the invisible empire long ago. The Genoese bankers discovered something astonishing. You didn't need to own the cargo to profit from it, only the contract. Today's financiers have perfected that principle to the point of parity. Derivatives, options, futures, these are the new caravels, the modern argosies of fortune. They move faster than any ship ever could, carrying not goods, but bets on what goods might be worth. The digital marketplace is not built on reality, but on anticipation, an empire of abstraction so vast that it dwarfs the physical economy that sustains it. And like the merchants of the 14th century, today's traders worship a single god, liquidity, the ability to move, to shift, to trade risk faster than consequence can arrive. But the irony is as old as history itself. Liquidity, like the tide, always demands a price. The fragile faith of the modern world, if global finance began as an act of trust between two merchants, it now rests on a faith far more fragile, the faith that the system itself will endure. When millions of trades occur every second, no single human can comprehend what is being risked. Markets collapse faster than governments can react. And yet, belief persists, belief that the algorithms know better, that the invisible hand still steadies the wheel. It is the same illusion that once guided ships into the unknown, that somewhere, beneath the chaos, there is order. That fortune, though cruel, can be tamed, but history whispers another truth. The sea has no memory. It gives, and it takes without reason, without remorse. The ports of data and desire look closely at the skylines of our financial cities. Tokyo, Singapore, Hong Kong, New York, they glitter like the lanterns of old ports, but they are harbors of a different kind. Ships no longer arrive with silk and silver. They arrive as streams of data, fragments of human labor, translated into code. The cranes and warehouses have been replaced by servers and satellites. The docks have no smell, no sound, no storm, only heat, electricity, and speed. And yet, beneath the circuitry, the same human pulse remains: ambition, greed, the fear of loss, the dream of immortality through wealth. The tools have evolved, but the hearts that wield them have not. The new cartographers of wealth. Once, maps were drawn to chart the limits of discovery, coastlines, reefs, the unknown. Today, new maps are drawn not on paper, but in data. Economists, programmers, analysts, they are the new cartographers of the financial ocean. Their maps are made of algorithms, their compasses of probability. They no longer chart land, but behavior, predicting what billions will buy, sell, or believe. It is a remarkable transformation. The same impulse that once sent ships across oceans now drives code across networks. The same hunger for expansion, efficiency, and control, still disguised as progress. But as the old ports learned, no map can truly tame the sea. When the sea turns against its masters in 2008, the tide turned. The great financial collapse was not a storm of water, but of numbers, a hurricane of risk that had been multiplied, abstracted, and forgotten until it consumed its creators. For a brief moment, the illusion shattered. The invisible empire trembled. And as the world stared into the abyss, the ghosts of Genoa and Bruges seemed to whisper, "You built this house upon trust, and now you no longer remember what trust means." The lesson was ancient. Finance, at its core, is not about numbers. It is about belief. And belief, once lost, cannot be traded back into existence. Echoes of the forgotten ports today. The world's markets have recovered, or so we tell ourselves. The ships still sail, only faster. The trades still flow, only larger. The language of risk has grown more complex, but the story remains the same. Every skyscraper in every financial city still carries the echo of those forgotten harbors. Every stock, every contract, every algorithm still bears the fingerprints of the men who once stood on the docks and dared to measure the immeasurable. They believed they could control fate. So do we. And perhaps that is humanity's oldest delusion, the one that built both our empires and our collapses. The sea within, we have built new oceans, oceans of code, capital, and calculation. We have turned risk into wealth, uncertainty into power. But somewhere, deep beneath the glow of our digital ports, the same question remains unanswered. Who truly commands the tide? For in every century, every generation, every system we build, the ocean always finds a way to remind us it cannot be owned, it cannot be tamed, it can only be crossed, again and again, by those brave or foolish enough to believe that this time they will reach the other side. The mirror and the machine by now. The ports are silent. The ships have long turned to dust. Even the digital tides hum quietly, buried beneath glass towers and cold algorithms that never sleep. And yet, in all this precision, something deeply human still flickers, fragile, stubborn, unquantifiable, because behind every number, every trade, every calculated risk, there is still a face. Finance was never just a system, it was a mirror. And what it reflected, from the first merchants of Venice to the coders of Wall Street, was the human desire to outwit uncertainty itself. The great reversal we began with ships and storms. Now, we have servers and simulations. But in chasing mastery over chaos, we have built something eerily familiar, a system as unpredictable as the sea. It replaced our models, promised control. Our data whispers certainty, but reality, as always, refuses to obey. Markets surge and crash like waves, trends rise like tides and vanish like foam. The same emotions that sank fortunes centuries ago, fear, greed, pride, still command the helm. Perhaps the only difference is that now, the storms move faster, and when they come, they are silent. The cult of calculation, we once prayed to gods, now we pray to numbers. Every click, every trade, every microsecond of market movement is treated as divine revelation, as though the data itself contains truth. But the machine does not dream, it does not hope, it does not forgive. The algorithms we built to eliminate risk have instead learned to mimic us. They speculate, they react, they spiral, each a reflection of the chaos they were meant to contain. What began as a tool of order has become an echo chamber of our own uncertainty. And still, we trust it, because to question it would be to admit that we are lost again, adrift on a sea we once thought we had conquered. The invisible cost of progress. Every generation inherits a story about mastery. Ours tells us that with enough data, enough computing power, enough innovation, we can predict anything. But the cost of that belief is hidden, buried in the illusion that risk can be erased rather than merely displaced. We have built financial systems that move faster than human conscience, capable of wiping out fortunes in the time it takes for a heartbeat to register. And yet, we call it progress. Because as long as the numbers grow, as long as the charts climb upward, the discomfort can be ignored. We have become merchants of velocity, trading meaning for momentum, and calling it success. The ghost in the code, somewhere between the lines of data, the human ghost still lingers. It can't be modeled, but it shapes everything. The subtle panic before a sell-off, the thrill of speculation, the irrational faith that tomorrow will be kinder. These impulses are not bugs in the system, they are the system. Every financial empire, from the docks of Amsterdam to the skyscrapers of Singapore, has been built upon the same fragile foundation: belief. Belief that coins have meaning, belief that contracts can bind the future, belief that the game can continue indefinitely, that as long as we keep moving, the tide will never turn. But belief is volatile, and when it breaks, the machine breaks with it. The new Babel. Look around. Each financial city is a Babel built of ambition. Tokyo, London, Dubai, Shanghai. They rise like monuments to the idea that the human mind can organize the chaos of the world through capital alone. And perhaps, for a while it can. But the higher we build, the more we forget the ground we started from. The forgotten ports, those muddy, chaotic birthplaces of trade, remind us that finance was never pure. It was an act of survival, an attempt to translate risk into endurance, chaos into continuity. Now our cities float above that original humility, suspended on speculation, inflated by confidence, defended by faith in the system's infallibility, and like every tower before it, the higher it climbs, the thinner the air becomes. The human equation here is the truth that no spreadsheet can calculate. Finance is not about money. It is about time, it is about trust, it is about the stories we tell ourselves to justify both. Every trade is a negotiation with the future, an attempt to seize tomorrow before it arrives. But in doing so, we forget that tomorrow is never guaranteed. That was the secret the merchants of the old ports understood instinctively. They knew every voyage was a gamble, every cargo a confession of faith. They did not expect certainty. They simply learned to live within the storm. We, on the other hand, have tried to erase the storm entirely, and in doing so, we've lost the very art of navigation. The machine that learned to dream artificial intelligence now makes trades in nanoseconds. It analyzes sentiment, predicts crises, manufactures trends before they even exist. In a strange twist of irony, the machine now behaves more like us than we ever imagined: anxious, opportunistic, erratic. It mirrors our hunger, our impatience, our refusal to rest. And perhaps that is the ultimate irony of financial history. The more we automate the system, the more it reveals what it has always been: a human drama disguised as mathematics. We built the machine to transcend ourselves. Instead, it has become the perfect reflection of who we truly are. The mirror, so we return, at last, to the mirror. In it, we see the ancient ports, the ships, the traders, the storms. We see the birth of insurance, of credit, of speculation. We see Tokyo's rebirth, London's dominance, New York's insomnia, and we see ourselves still running, still calculating, still terrified that the tide might change. Perhaps it always will. Perhaps that is the price of progress. Because finance, for all its grandeur and complexity, is ultimately a story of humanity, our fears, our ambitions, our refusal to accept uncertainty as our natural state. The system is not the enemy, it is the mirror, and in that reflection, distorted though it may be, we glimpse the truth. We have not conquered risk. We have merely learned to disguise it. In ledgers, in data, in dreams, the tide in the silence, the tide is rising again. A new system will replace the old. New markets, new machines, new promises of stability. And someday, long after our skyscrapers crumble and our servers fall silent, another civilization will look back and ask, how did they believe so completely in the illusion of control? And perhaps, like us, they will smile, because they too will be human. And they too will build their ships, launch their systems, and call it progress, never realizing that the tide has been watching all along. The circle in the ledger history, they say, is a cycle. But in finance, the circle is not made of stone, it is drawn in ink, erased and redrawn again. From the clatter of coins in ancient ports to the hum of digital markets, the story has always been the same: humans trying to bargain with uncertainty. Every age believes it has perfected the art of control. Every empire believes it has solved the equation of risk. And every one of them, inevitably, beautifully, discovers that it has not. The first ledger, it began, as all stories do, with trust. A merchant writes a promise on paper, a lender records a number in a ledger, and a stranger across the sea believes it. That belief was the first form of wealth, not gold, not silver, but the idea that tomorrow could be guaranteed by ink. Those early ledgers, fragile and stained with salt water, became the DNA of the modern world. They taught us that value could move without ships, that power could exist in abstraction, that numbers could replace faith. But they also carried a hidden curse, the belief that the future itself could be owned. The rise and the repetition from Amsterdam to London, from New York to Tokyo. Every financial city rose upon the same foundation, a promise disguised as innovation. The stock exchange was not new. It was merely a new name for an old hunger. The insurance contract was not safety, it was a wager wrapped in respectability. The global market was not freedom, it was dependence, accelerated. Each new system declared itself the end of chaos, and each one, inevitably, became its next incarnation. Because progress, for all its light, carries the shadow of repetition. The ports become cities, the traders become bankers, the ledgers become algorithms. And yet the pattern remains: desire, expansion, collapse, and rebirth. The age of abstraction today, wealth no longer has weight. It exists in signals, in servers, in invisible lines of code, traveling faster than thought. But abstraction has not freed us. It has only made the illusion more perfect. Our cities glow brighter, our systems hum smoother. But beneath the surface lies the same pulse: fear disguised as precision, faith disguised as analysis. We have built a cathedral of data, and we pray not to gods, but to graphs. And still, the tide moves. The forgotten ports remembered somewhere beneath glass towers and digital screens lies the memory of the ports that began it all. The smell of salt, the shouts of merchants, the trembling of ships about to leave shore. They remind us that finance was never born from greed, but from vulnerability. It was not about domination, but about endurance. Trade began as a way to survive the unknown, not to eliminate it. It was a gesture of hope that across the chaos of the world someone would keep their promise. And maybe, in that sense, nothing has changed. The ledger closes, so where does the story end? It doesn't, because every crisis is a prologue, every collapse a seed for reinvention. The circle tightens, the ink fades, and another hand begins to write again. The ledgers change form from parchment to paper, from code to quantum, but the impulse remains the same: to measure the unmeasurable, to price the priceless, to find meaning in the movement of numbers. In that endless pursuit, humanity reveals itself ingenious, fragile, contradictory, always building systems it cannot fully control, always believing that this time, the circle will hold. When future historians look back on us, our markets, our screens, our blind faith in data, They will not see a civilization that conquered risk. They will see one that danced with it. A species that refused to accept chaos, that turned uncertainty into industry and fear into architecture. They will find in our financial history not just transactions, but testaments, proof of our need to believe that order can emerge from the storm. And perhaps, in that faith, they will recognize themselves. Because in the end, every number, every ledger, every city built on trade and trust, tells the same story, that humanity, for all its ambition, has always been trying to balance a single equation between fear and hope, between risk and reward, between chaos and meaning. That is the true circle of financial history, and like all circles, it never ends.